You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. On your screens right about now, you should see the title for today's Warrior Creed live stream: Pakistan and India on brink of war after October the 7th style terrorist attack kills 27 in Kashmir. The image there being used as the thumbnail and the title screen image, that's an image of the Pakistan and India border troops at the Wagah border. That is a ceremony that occurs, I believe, daily. However, that border is now closed and the crossing will be shut down because of what we're about to go into. And the Times reports on your screens now, Pakistan is preparing for imminent India attack. That's today's Times of London. The subheading reads, the Pakistani defense minister claimed India's rhetoric had been escalating in the days since a terrorist attack in Kashmir raised the threat of war. Just to read an extract from that article for you. This is from the 28th of April. The Times reports the Pakistani defense minister has said his country is reinforcing troops in the anticipation of an imminent military incursion by India. Tensions between the two nuclear powers have been growing since militants last week killed 26 tourists in Kashmir. One Kashmiri Muslim was also killed attempting to stop the terrorists, so that takes the total to 27, by the way. And an attack, India has said, was linked to Pakistan. So what's happened? Well, there's a useful summary for everybody in this particular Times leader column. Terrorism in Kashmir is pushing India and Pakistan to the brink of war. Social cohesion and India's once famed tolerance of ethnic and religious diversity are under growing threat. This from the 25th of April. As we said, a nice summary in the Times of everything that's happened to date. The massacre of 26 Indian tourists by Islamist militants in Indian-controlled Kashmir on Tuesday has brought India and Pakistan close to outright war in a dizzyingly swift escalation, illustrating the endemic tension between the two countries. India immediately accused Pakistan of backing the militants. The group, by the way, that was behind this attack that killed 26 Indian tourists who were specifically identified by the group as Hindu upon being asked their religious affiliation in an ISIS-style sectarian attack. 26 Indian Hindu tourists were killed and one Kashmiri Muslim attempting to stop the killings, taking the total to 27 by a previously unheard of or little heard of group, naming itself Kashmiri Resistance. More on that later in this stream. For the moment, continuing to read from the Times, we're reading now from the beginning of the bold text. India immediately accused Pakistan of backing the militants, closed the only land border crossing, and that's the Wagah border we just showed you an image of, and suspended a crucial water sharing treaty that has withstood two earlier wars. More on that treaty in a moment as well. That's a very significant shift in the dynamic between the two countries. To continue reading, Delhi also revoked the visas of Pakistani nationals in India, denying any involvement in the massacre. Pakistan responded by cancelling the visas of Indian nationals, closing Pakistani airspace to Indian airlines, and suspending bilateral trade. Soldiers from both sides have since exchanged fire across the line of control, which is the militarized frontier dividing Kashmir. It is a dangerous situation. The attack by a group calling itself Kashmir Resistance that left 27 dead is a very specific style of urban terrorist attack. It is a style first developed by the Lashkar-e-Taiba in the now infamous Mumbai attacks. It is the kind of attack where terrorists roam the streets, isolating their targets, identifying whether or not they are Muslim or Hindu. In this case, when they were identified as Hindu, 26 of them were murdered. The style, as we say, is an ISIS style of an attack made infamous, though of course started in Mumbai with the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is a Pakistan-based jihadist organization usually backed in its operational protections by the Pakistani military intelligence, known as the Inter-Services Intelligence, or the ISI. However, though developed by LET or Lashkar-e-Taiba in attacks such as the Mumbai attack, the style was thus developed further and made infamous globally by ISIS, a jihadist organization known to have operated in Iraq and Syria under its now dead pretender to the caliphate, Namdagir Baghdadi. And ISIS, unlike Lashkar-e-Taiba, known to be backed by Pakistan's ISI, ISIS is known to have been backed by the CIA and Mossad in Syria to destabilize Assad and his regime, eventually, of course, culminating in the ousting of Assad in Syria and the rise to power of the new prime minister of Syria, formerly known as Jolani, now known as Ahmed al-Shara. Those comparisons are important to keep in mind for what we're going to come to in this stream by way of analysis. But for the meanwhile, suffice to say that exactly as the October the 7th attacks led to, these attacks are being threatened to lead to a tit-for-tat escalation. And you can see there the Times reports on the 28th of April, headlined, "Children ordered to leave mothers behind in India as border closes." We're going to read from the text there. India blames Pakistan, and Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has vowed to pursue the terrorists and their backers to the ends of the earth. Now, that's again a very Netanyahu-style response to the attack. If you recall, Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu, again with the Hamas attack on October the 7th, vowing to pursue the terrorists to the end of the earth until every single one of them has been eliminated. What that resulted in instead is the current and ongoing siege in Gaza that has left the entire Palestinian population of Gaza starving, and countless children being either bombed to death, traumatized and disabled, or indeed starving as well. So the kind of rhetoric that these sorts of attack inspire and the reciprocation that they inspire from the regimes that have been hurt is usually the kind of response that is termed as an overreaction that leads to a outpouring of sympathy for the victims and a hemorrhaging of support for the regime conducting such responses. Nevertheless, Modi has decided to use a similar form of rhetoric. So you can see again in the Times there, Modi has said that, second line down, he will pursue the terrorists and their backers to the ends of the earth. Continuing to read from the Times on the 28th of April, Pakistan denies any connection to the attack and has promised tit-for-tat responses to punitive action by Delhi. Reports suggested that after a week of diplomatic reprisals, India would soon launch military action and that several options were being considered. This would please the crowd watching the Wagah border flag lowering ceremony. War is the only answer, said Ravish Shulka from central India, who had Indian flags painted on his face. Others chanted, "Attack, attack, attack," when asked how Modi should respond. Again, these attacks often have the net effect of rallying the population from where the victims, most of them, hail from, in this case India, rallying them for war. And that's important as well to understand when questioning quo bono, who benefits, because, of course, these sorts of attacks are always the norm prior to any war being launched. It's exactly as happened on October the 7th. An attack was required for the war on Gaza to be launched. Again, coming to that in just a moment, more details on that and the comparisons and the similarities with this. But at this stage, you can see the rhetoric is already becoming very similar. But there is an added element here, which is due to the location of Kashmir. The added element is the water streaming down in the rivers from the Himalayan mountain range. People often forget that the most famous mountains on the planet that you all would have heard of, Mount Everest, for example, are in that Himalayan mountain range, the very area where this attack has occurred, Kashmir. India, China, and Pakistan all have a border on that mountain range where these attacks have happened. Everest is on the Chinese side of the mountain range, of the Himalayan mountain range, but the second tallest mountain in the world is on the Pakistani side of the border, known as K2. Nevertheless, the issue here is that, a bit like the Nile and the downstream challenges that Egypt is currently facing with dams and blocking of the river upstream in places like Ethiopia and Eritrea, the challenges and Sudan, the challenges for India and Pakistan are that these rivers begin on the Chinese side of the Himalayan range, but then they flow through the Indian side of the Himalayan range and eventually land on the Pakistani side. So India is upstream from Pakistan in that Himalayan mountain range. The region known as Punjab, that the 1947 partition by the British Raj, when the British Empire left the Indian subcontinent, the Punjab was partitioned. It's a province within the Indian subcontinent. When the Punjab was partitioned, Kashmir, this region where the attack was similarly partitioned between these countries. Now, Punjab itself means the 5 rivers. Banj means 5, Ab means waters. So you can get an understanding of the strategic significance of this area and generally of the Himalayan mountain range. Of course, all 3 militaries are demanding and currently occupy the high points of these mountain ranges because, of course, that is the most strategic area to occupy for a military in the event of any war. It's the same reason Israel has kept the Golan Heights from Syria, because it's as it is in the name, it's a high area, the Golan Heights. And so the Himalayan range, Kashmir, where these attacks have occurred, the partition that occurred in 1947, it left, of course, a delineated border between Pakistan and India that runs through Punjab, that province that we just mentioned, the 5 rivers. Punjab is, as a result of 1947, was split into 2. Half of it went to India, the other half, where my family originates, went to Pakistan. Now, that border was largely agreed upon, except where the mountain range began. So from the foothills of the Himalayan mountain range onwards, the border was not agreed upon and remains in dispute. And the line of control is where the 2 militaries, and in China's case, 3 militaries, but the line of control refers to Pakistan and India. That line of control is where the de facto border is, because of where the troops are currently lined up. My family hails from a city called Gujarat on the Pakistani side of this border, on the foothills of the Himalayas, right there on the border with India, but on the Pakistani side, right where, pretty much close to where these troubles have occurred. So with that explanation, it's important to understand, because then you can see why this Times headline on the 27th of April is headed as it is. Are India and Pakistan on the cusp of war over water? To read the text, on Wednesday, India placed the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, or suspension, a signal that one of the last remaining buffers of stability between the 2 countries is beginning to crumble. Islamabad said, the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad, said that any attempt to stop or divert water belonging to Pakistan would amount to an act of war. On Friday, the Indian minister, Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, said not a single drop of water meant for India will be allowed to flow into Pakistan. His response suggested that Delhi might be serious about weaponizing rivers that are lifelines for millions of people in neighboring Pakistan. Of course, if India carried through with its threat, it's now suspended that treaty that governs those waters, the 5 rivers flowing down from the Himalayas through Indian-controlled Kashmir into Pakistan proper. If India carries through with its threat and turns off the tap on those rivers, of course it would lead to war. However, we do not think that's going to happen, and we're going to explain why. But this is a map of what we just described. You can count those rivers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, apart from the fork in the lowest one there. If you count the fork, it's 6, but actually that's 5 rivers for you. It's called Punjab for that reason. And all 5 of them flow through the Pakistani side. However, as you can see, if you follow the lowest 4, they begin in the Kashmir area, which is the top right corner of the map. And that is the problem, that the Kashmir area, that India, the Indian side of that area, India can threaten a lot of that, the original sources of that water, of those rivers, that, as you can see, the majority of which end up on the Pakistani side of the border. That is a major, major problem. And that would, of course, lead to war if India carried through on that threat. And talking of war, this is what the militaries of the two countries currently look like. By every metric on this graph, you can see that India, being a larger nation, of course, outnumbers Pakistan, whether it's by combat troops. You can see there a huge difference: 1,475,750 for India, 666,000 for Pakistan, broken down by Army, Navy, and Air Force. Though, of course, Pakistan's Air Force and Navy have a great worldwide reputation, they still are outnumbered. If you look at battle tanks, again, India's 3,750 outnumber Pakistan's 2,537. If you look at air defense, Pakistan greatly outnumbered, though, of course, its Air Force reputed to be stronger, despite the lower numbers. Look at combat aircrafts. Again, India outnumbers Pakistan by 721 to 465. Submarines, India outnumbers Pakistan by 18 to 8. And frigates and destroyers, India outnumbers Pakistan by 27 to 11. And so, of course, by every metric, including population, India's, like China's, over 1 billion in population. Pakistan's only in the hundreds of millions, though growing faster than most other nations on the planet, including India, and may well, if the current trajectory is held, overtake India and China in the next 2 decades. But right now, is outnumbered by India's population. However, the great equalizer, that is the travesty of nuclear weapons, at the end of the day, renders being outnumbered in the way that we just depicted less relevant, because, of course, nuclear weapons are a great equalizer. And the Times on the 28th of April today reports Pakistan's leader, Hanif Abbasi, in turn warned Indians that his country's nuclear arsenal was not merely for display, and threatened nuclear retaliation. India has suspended a crucial water sharing treaty that regulates the supply of water to its neighbor, and has long been credited with preventing direct conflict over the precious resource between the two nations. Abbasi said that if water failed to reach Pakistan, Indians should know that Pakistan's nuclear weapons are targeted at you. So, of course, the being outnumbered by every traditional metric in terms of armed forces becomes less relevant when you consider that both nations are a nuclear power, and nuclear weapons they level the playing field. No nation that is a nuclear nation will go to war against another nation. It is highly unlikely, because in the case of losing such a war, the nuclear empowered nation would simply detonate, and that's known as mutually assured destruction, or MAD. Genuinely, the acronym is MAD. It's a military doctrine, and it would lead to the total and complete annihilation of both nuclear armed countries. It's why Israel, suspected of being a nuclear power, it's why Israel, again, going to direct war against Israel would not be feasible for any nation such as Pakistan that is a nuclear power. It would lead to mutually assured destruction. In Israel's case, they have a specific directive called the Hannibal Directive that governs the use of such weapons to absolutely annihilate and destroy everybody, including themselves. Think of it a bit like a kamikaze who decides that if they cannot win, they'd rather take themselves down while killing as many of the enemy as possible. When you make the cost of victory so high that it means the annihilation of both sides, of course, your opponent, even if they're stronger, cannot play for victory, because what's the point of victory if you're dead? So, really, these two nuclear armed power nations are unlikely to go to war unless they're being governed by absolute insane psychopaths. Now, the Times reports again on the 28th of April about the tensions in both countries leading to these escalations. And as analysts say, tensions may have flared up again because the new head of the Pakistan army, Asim Munir, takes a more ideological hardline approach in Kashmir. Only a few days before the attack, he said that Pakistan would not forget Kashmir and its brethren there. Others suggest it's because India has meddled more in the affairs of Pakistan in recent years, carrying out assassinations and helping the Baloch separatist movement. India denies these allegations and says these attacks happen when Pakistan is in internal disarray and needs a unifying cause. The truth is that both of those accusations are true. Pakistan, on the one hand, has had a history of supporting jihadist terrorist groups such as the Lashkar-e-Taiba that we referred to earlier, the LET, and its infamous Mumbai attacks. Based in the city of Muridki in Pakistan, I have personally visited what used to be, before they were prescribed as a terrorist organization, what used to be known as their annual Ijtima, or the annual gathering of LET in Muridki, visiting as an observer. And it is known that the LET were backed by the Pakistani military intelligence, or the ISI. So the accusation that the Indians levy against Pakistan, that it has a long history of supporting terrorists across the border in Kashmir to and beyond into India proper, to destabilize India and to essentially create an insurrection in Kashmir and thereby force a realignment of the authority in Kashmir into the Pakistan sphere of control, that accusation has a history of accuracy. But so does the Pakistani accusation against India, that India in turn has sometimes been involved in supporting separatists in a Pakistani province known as Balochistan, as it has been involved in supporting insurrection in Afghanistan against Taliban rule prior to the Taliban retaking Afghanistan against Pakistani interests. So both of those accusations are true. And it's important in the context of seeking a peaceful resolution to this flare-up. We have said we do not think all-out war is likely, despite the rhetoric, despite what both sides are currently threatening, and despite what the media is currently speculating on. We do not think an all-out war is likely, though reprisals are likely. Those reprisals are likely to be controlled and are likely to be measured, as is the case with military escalation that is done in a calculated way. However, those accusations are largely accurate. And for peace to be sustained in this region, it behooves both sides of this conflict to accept these accusations and commit to going about to being more sincere in their dealings with each other. And in that spirit, we welcome Sky News' interview by Yalda Hakim with the Pakistani Defense Minister, Khwaja Asif, because upon being asked about the history of Pakistan's support for terrorist groups in India, he gave a very forthright and candid answer. But indeed, it wasn't just a candid answer, it was a very honest answer, because it went beyond being frank and candid into being so honest that it also embroiled the United States and the United Kingdom, and by the way, accurately embroiled the United States and the United Kingdom. More on this in a second. Let's have a look at the clip from Sky News, an interview by Sky News' Yalda Hakim with Pakistan's Defense Minister Khwaja.
That Pakistan has had a long history of backing and supporting and training and funding these terrorist organizations.
Well, we have been doing this dirty work for the United States for about 3 decades, and West, including Britain.
So that's your argument that
that was a mistake, and we suffered for that, and that is why you are saying this to me. If we had not joined the war against Soviet Union and later on the war after 9/11, Pakistan's track record, was not, an unimpeachable track record.
Defence Minister, I just want to get back to this particular incident in Kashmir and the noises that are now coming out of Delhi. Do you believe this situation is going to escalate and that India will launch airstrikes? Is Pakistan preparing itself for that?
We are already prepared for it, We are already prepared for it. Any eventuality which takes place in next 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 days or week or 10 days, we'll retaliate and we'll react to that, in kind, inshallah.
How will you respond if India does launch a series of airstrikes?
We will measure our response to whatever is initiated by India according to that.
Now, it's important to keep in mind that Pakistan still denies any involvement with this hitherto unknown group, Kashmir Resistance, that's been behind this October the 7th style attack that left 27 dead. But reflecting on that clip, it's interesting to note the honesty of the Defense Minister Khwaja from Pakistan's side, admitting to Yalda Hakim's question that, yes, Pakistan has had a history of supporting cross-border terrorist attacks to destabilize India. However, the way in which he admitted it was clever, perhaps sly, because he blamed the US and the UK, which is a half-truth. The truth that is half true here is that the US and the UK have indeed been involved in this, particularly the US, since the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan in the 80s. In that part, he is correct. The US pretty much via the CIA, via Al-Qaeda, a now known to be CIA asset. 2 CIA assets were on the aeroplanes in the 9/11 attacks. That is also known. This isn't any longer disputed. But back to bin Laden, he was now known as a CIA asset. And at the time, the US and CIA policy was to encourage a jihadist insurrection in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. And of course, the UK, he mentioned there, the UK were, through the intelligence communities and the Five Eyes alliances, allies with the US in this effort. So in that, he is correct. However, why it's a half-truth is because Sky News' Yalda Hakim was asking him specifically about Kashmir, not about Afghanistan. This attack occurred in Kashmir, which is on the other side of the country. It's on the northeast, not the northwest. And those 2 areas are not joined other than by Pakistan in the middle of them. There is no connection geographically between them other than the connection of Pakistan. Yalda of Sky News was asking the defense minister of Pakistan's support for insurrections in the northeast, in Kashmir, in the map that we have shown you. And let's see if we can pull it up again. If we still can find it here, the map. There we are. You see Afghanistan on the northwest, on the left. It is unconnected to the area where those rivers originate from in the northeast, Kashmir. And so Yalda was asking him about Pakistan's support for insurrection in Kashmir, specifically for the Salafi jihadist group Lashkar-e-Taiba, based out of Muridki in Pakistan, and other Salafi jihadist groups. His response was to say that Pakistan has been supporting the efforts of the globalists and under the CIA of supporting jihadist insurrection in Afghanistan, as we say. Of course, that part is true, and it does have a radicalizing effect on the country. Bin Laden himself was allegedly found in Abbottabad, and all of that, the whole Al-Qaeda globalist jihadist network, Pakistan did suffer, and Pakistan is correct to blame the globalists, to blame the CIA, to blame the US for the fact that they were asked to cooperate, and it led to the spread of more and more jihadism. But that is unrelated to the Pakistani military intelligence or the ISI's support for cross-border jihadist groups into Kashmir. The last we checked, Pakistan has not even ever made the allegation that the CIA has asked them to fund, arm, and support Lashkar-e-Taiba or the LET. However, again, we caveat, Pakistan still does not accept that this attack by a group that is hitherto unknown, naming itself Kashmir Resistance, had anything to do with it. And it is worthy of pausing here, despite the history and despite what it looks like, because, of course, having heard what we've just said, it does look bad for Pakistan and for Asim Munir, the military leader in charge, because the civilian government, by the way, is just a hand puppet of the military who are really in charge. It does look quite bad for the Pakistani military due to the fact they have a history of complicity in this. But we say at the moment, it is important to keep in mind that the Pakistanis are still denying it. And the reason we say that is because it isn't very clear at this stage if the same as what has been happening in the past has happened again, or something new and uniquely evil has been behind the Kashmir resistance terrorist attack. Indications are, of course, they are jihadi, or at least inspired by, because by asking whether the victims were Hindu or Muslim, you can see there's a religious hate crime element in the attack. We're going to read again, on that note, again from the Times, the 25th of April, trying to get to the bottom of what could have been behind these attacks. Such reckless responses from both sides, that is, are extremely dangerous. Both governments are under pressure at home and are seeking an external diversion to rally restive public opinion. In Pakistan, the jailing of Imran Khan, the deposed prime minister, on trumped-up charges against his party, and the maneuverings of the army and the powerful Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, or the ISI, their military intelligence, to retain their grip over the squabbling politicians, have reduced the country to an almost ungovernable state. So all of that on the Pakistan side are the pressures for why the Pakistanis may be behind it. To recap that for you and summarize it, domestically, Pakistani army leadership could be said to need a war to rally the population behind them. And of course, who better than to need a war against than the traditional bogeyman for Pakistan, which is India and always has been, because they are so unpopular. Again, true. They are so unpopular domestically, having imprisoned perhaps the most popular leader in that country's history after Jinnah, the founder. And that is the cricket captain, former Prime Minister Imran Khan, and his party, Pakistani Tehreek-e-Insaf, or the PTI. So because they are so unpopular at home after having jailed Imran Khan, we here have been openly supporting Imran Khan's release from jail, but not only his release from jail, but his return to power. Of course, he was ousted after he refused to accept the globalists' encouragement that he join in against Russia in the war in Ukraine and vote against Russia and also support Ukraine. He refused and said he would remain neutral. And he was very quickly, subsequently ousted by globalists. And he made a public allegation that he was ousted for that reason on television, naming the US State Department and the individual Donald Lu, Undersecretary of State for South Asian Affairs at the US State Department, as the main culprit behind his ousting. It was an extraordinary series of events. The former Prime Minister of Imran Khan, saying all this on television with CNN's Becky Anderson, and to almost shut him up, he was then thrown into prison. For all these reasons, Pakistan's army leadership under Asim Munir is incredibly unpopular. The population, there's been an assassination attempt, as there was on Trump, against Imran Khan, and the population is incredibly anti-government right now, more so than perhaps at any other time in history. I mentioned my family's origins being from that border region, the foothills of the Himalayan, in a city called Gujarat on the Pakistan side of the border, and right next to Kashmir. And my father, who was born and raised there, is a Pakistani Navy veteran who fought himself in the 1965 Pakistan-India war that was sparked by something called Operation Gibraltar, where the Pakistani military sought to, again, spur an insurrection inside Indian-controlled Kashmir. That operation failed. The two countries went to war over it. My father served on the Pakistani warship known as the Badr destroyer. They were lobbing missiles at each other in the Indian Ocean. The reason I mention that is, despite that history, my father being a war veteran, even he has turned on the Pakistani army leadership and openly supports Imran Khan's release from jail. The former soldiers, former armed forces of Pakistan have historically always supported the army leadership, and the public has historically always remained quiet about the failings of the army leadership. But this time, since the jailing of Imran Khan and onwards, it is an unprecedented insurrection inside Pakistan against not only the civilian population, civilian leadership, of the politicians on both sides of the uni party. Yes, Pakistan itself suffers right now from a uni party. So that civilian population on both have turned against both sides, the PPP and the Muslim League of their political spectrum, because they've recognized that the army leadership are the ones that are puppeteering both sides, and they are blaming that leadership of being beholden to the globalists and the CIA, and have been, since the jailing of Imran Khan, the population has been attempting on a number of occasions to overthrow the civilian government and bring Imran Khan back to power. The army leadership in Pakistan, as a result, has been incredibly unpopular. We will publish and republish all the receipts for what we're saying in tomorrow's written version of this stream in the Radical Dispatch. So it could well be that to shore up support the best domestically, the army leadership has continued to be true to form, supporting insurrection in India in the hope that it bolsters some domestic jingoism and lends them some support, not least from the country's numerous and quite domineering Islamist and jihadist groups who salivate at any opportunity to kill a few quote unquote mushrikeen or idol worshippers. However, that's again only half the story. We're going to read from the second half of this Times extract, where it's halfway down. It says, in India, to begin from there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth line down. Towards the end of that sixth line, in India, the fallout raises even greater stakes. Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has seen his image and his political dominance under growing attack since he unexpectedly failed to achieve a predicted landslide electoral victory last year. Having risen to power on the openly sectarian platform of the Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP, he has steadily pushed through more and more discriminatory laws and has been hurting India's large Muslim minority. He now has to keep ahead of the sectarian wave he has unleashed and needs to bolster his standing with powerful Hindu nationalists by identifying Muslim Pakistan as the enemy seeking to undermine India's attempts to emerge as a world power. Again, the perspective from the Indian side also has credibility, or the Pakistani perspective on what's going on the Indian side also has credibility. It is the case that the BJP under Prime Minister Modi has become a rabidly anti-Muslim, sectarian, not just populist, but ethno-fascist, Hindutva, Hindu supremacist party, which, if you trace it back to its history, again, this is something that is not really disputable, has its origins in being inspired by Nazi supremacist ideology, exactly as Islamism does, by the way. And so, again, all of this came to the Indian subcontinent through interwar, World War I, World War II, interwar period, European fascism. And both Pakistan and India still are dealing with the consequences of that, cognitive shift of ideas that occurred from Europe and the interwar fascist period into Muslim majority lands, the Middle East, of course, as well being affected by that cognitive infiltration or semantic infiltration, which is the correct phrase to use for that. However, it is the Pakistani perspective on what could be going wrong on the Indian side is also accurate. Modi has adopted the rhetoric of Netanyahu in this war, but not just in this war, prior to the war as well. Modi's interior minister has previously called Muslims cockroaches. And also in reprisals to these attacks, Modi has already begun house demolitions in Kashmir. Again, a tactic very similar to what Israel does in response to Hamas attacks. And so it's important to understand that right now, devoid of evidence, both sides have compelling domestic reasons to have either, in Pakistan's case, been true to its historical form and been behind this attack, or in India's case, been behind this as a false flag, seeking a pretext to clamp down in Indian-controlled Kashmir, because Indian-controlled Kashmir is majority Muslim. India has the same problem that Netanyahu is attempting to deal with in his own brutal ethnic cleansing manner in Gaza. Modi has also previously, up until prior to this, running up until this attack, in the events leading up to this attack, Modi remilitarized Indian-controlled Kashmir and has been attempting to play with the demographics to somehow deal with the fact that the area has a majority Muslim population. And with all of that in mind, it becomes important not to allow for the rhetoric that is hate-filled rhetoric on either side to rear its head, because whoever was behind this attack in facilitating this previously unheard of group Kashmir resistance will be seeking right now to ratchet up the rhetoric in order to provoke war, even if it's not an all-out war, in order to provoke a limited war for their own purposes. And with that in mind, it's important to keep this information at the forefront, and that is that the vast majority of Muslims would have stood by in aid of preventing the attacks. And as you can see here by an Indian poster, a former government official, or a government official it looks like, to read from it says, just to recap, tourists came in taxis belonging to Muslims, stayed in hotels owned by Muslims. They ate food cooked by Muslims, rode ponies. It's a tourist area in the mountains. Rode ponies owned by Muslims, did trekking guided by Muslims. When terrorists started their attack, they were covered and protected by Muslims. The first person to die defending was a Muslim. Those who came first to help were Muslims. Pony owners, ATV rides and pillowback rides to safety done by Muslims. First aid and rescue done by Muslims. Ambulance driven by Muslims. Treated in hospitals by Muslim doctors and nurses. Taxi drivers who drove the tourists back to Srinagar were Muslims. And everywhere on social media, we see all Muslims are terrorists. So it's important to keep all of that in mind so that de-escalation can occur, because it's only de-escalation that will get us through this. Those tit-for-tat attacks that we saw after October the 7th only lead to ethnic cleansing and genocide. We've already seen this movie play out. It is crucially important to de-escalate. And with that in mind, the Times reports on the 28th of April, 2025, that's what at least some military voices think is going to happen. To read from that, they will be looking for a target that sends a strong message, but which is not too escalatory, said Lieutenant General Dipendra Singh Hooda, who was in charge of the Northern Command during the 2016 strike. He added that some backlash from Pakistan is to be expected, but, and this is the crucial part, no one wants an all-out war. Now, that's good news. Rejoice, everybody. The fact that you got a former Indian commander who took part in the 2016 strikes, Lieutenant General Dipendra Singh Hooda, very senior Indian commander of that northern area, saying no one wants all-out war, and that yes, there will be an India response, and yes, there may well be a Pakistani response to that, but all of those responses will be calculated and measured in military strategic terms, a bit like when you're playing chess and you just move a pawn instead of going all out, or you move unexpectedly, you move a piece for a longer play. That's the kind of response that is likely to happen here. We do not think we're going to lead to an all-out war, and not least because if you think back to the water dynamics that we mentioned earlier, again, showing you the map of the 5 rivers or the Punjab and the origins and the endpoints of those 5 rivers. You can see it on your screens again, beginning in Indian-controlled Kashmir, going through Pakistan-controlled Kashmir, and then ending up, all of them, inside Pakistan. Those 5 rivers, it becomes incredibly important that a war does not get sparked because of those. But we think de-escalation is on the table, not least because the starting point of those 5 rivers are in China. And as the Times notes here, what India threatened to do to Pakistan, China can easily do to India. The 27th of April, Times reports, if India tried to divert water from Pakistan, it could spark a regional conflict over water that could end badly for India itself, warned Aaron Wolf, a conflict resolution specialist renowned for his work on water diplomacy. He said, China is upstream of India and an ally of Pakistan. What India can do to Pakistan, China can do to India. China controls much of the world's water tower, as the high Himalayan glaciers are known. Mirumachi said that the development of dams by China is causing concerns for India. The fear is the Chinese could stop the flow. So you see there, again, another reason why de-escalation is likely is not just because the Lieutenant General of the Indian Armed Forces, who used to command that northern region and led the strikes in 2016, says that no one wants an all-out war. That's a very good indication that he says that, by the way. Take heart from that, take solace from that. But also another reason why all-out war is unlikely is because if India does cut the water supply to Pakistan, which Pakistan has said would be a declaration of war, and if India did it, they would go to war against India. However, if India did do that, China could just as easily do it to India, because the starting point of much of that water begins actually on the Chinese side of the border in the Himalayas. And China is an ally of Pakistan and particularly doesn't like India. And India doesn't like China. There is tension between those two countries. So that's another reason we think that escalation is unlikely. To continue reading from the Times on the 27th of April, others saw Delhi's move as aimed less at Pakistan than its own population. For me, it's a largely symbolic step, a populist measure designed to satisfy public appetite for action over the terror attacks, said Brahma Cheleni, a think tank analyst and author of Water, Asia's New Battleground. In reality, India doesn't have the hydro infrastructure to disrupt flows of water to Pakistan. It would take them 15 to 20 years to build all the dams they would need to have an impact. So that is another reason why we don't think that this will lead to all-out total conflict or war, because in India, as is mentioned there, doesn't even have the infrastructure needed to actually block those rivers and prevent the supply of water going into Pakistan. So there is unlikely to be total war, which would happen if India stopped water going into Pakistan. Remember, that's fresh water. There's literally what the country survives on. You cannot survive without fresh water. It's a very, very hot climate. And the fresh water that comes down from the Himalayas has historically sustained the entire civilizational development in that region, home to a civilization older than the ancient Egyptians, and that is the Indus Valley civilization. Much of that world heritage on the Pakistani side of the border, such as the Harappa ruins, all part of a World Heritage Site. The oldest irrigation system known to man in history is there, built by the Indus Valley civilization, pre-ancient Egyptian, in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, which are the remains which are still visible for everybody to go and see. And the reason they were able to do that is because of the water supply coming down from the Himalayas, and they built irrigation. It's that same water that continues to irrigate Pakistan's agricultural land today. Much of it, where my family's ancestry is, the Gujarat area of Pakistan, and that entire region, as you can see on the map, that is next to Islamabad, the country's capital, marked on this map in the northeast. That entire region is all agricultural land fed by those 5 rivers, fresh water from the Himalayas. If India cut that supply, it would be a declaration of total war. But if they did it, China could do it to them. It's why we think it's unlikely it's going to happen, though, of course, some form of response is likely. And it's in that vein that we ask everybody to keep in mind that escalation serves nobody other than the war hawks. So when the attack first happened, we issued this warning on the 24th of April. Warning, avoid falling for the trappings of previous test case October the 7th, cyclical escalations between Muslims and non-Muslims, traitors on every side from the world stage, but this time involving 2 nuclear rivals, but still kicked off by classic globalist terrorist proxies in order to provoke World War III, to derail the coming peace between nations that is currently being negotiated between all blocs and nations and is guided by God. Now, we want to unpack this warning. Look, the October the 7th style attack, first of all, the actual October the 7th attack that happened, you can see how it led to an escalation from Israel's side into effectively ethnically cleansing Gaza. Now, that attack, the evidence pretty much, and we'll publish all these receipts for you tomorrow, but the evidence does point to the fact that the attack was facilitated. In other words, Hamas did do the attack, but it was facilitated by Netanyahu and his Likud party in order to serve as a pretext for what Netanyahu wanted to do after the attack. Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the attack, now dead, his rise to power through Hamas was itself facilitated by Netanyahu. We've documented all these receipts in the Radical Dispatch, but we'll do so again tomorrow. Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October the 7th attack, was indeed released early from prison by Israel and allowed to return back to Gaza, and then, of course, allowed to rise through the ranks of Hamas to become its military leader, while other contenders were executed or assassinated by Israel so that the path was clear for him to rise through the ranks. On the day of the attack that he led himself, masterminded, on the day of the attack itself, October the 7th, the CCTV footage from the border crossing went missing, remains missing. Netanyahu is on the record having funded Hamas via Qatar all the way right up until this attack. Netanyahu is also on the record having stated openly that they want to fund Hamas so that they can divide the Palestinian state and pitch Fatah, the secular Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, against Hamas, the Islamist leadership in Gaza. Netanyahu was funding Hamas in order to facilitate Hamas being able to fight Fatah, because by dividing the Palestinian leadership, he could present to the world stage that the terrorists are in control and a Palestinian state is impossible, and the only solution is to cleanse them out of Gaza. All of this is on record. We can republish it for you tomorrow. But with that quick summary of what happened there on October 7th in mind, it's important to now read again our warning and keep all of that in mind so that the same isn't allowed to reoccur in Kashmir. So here's our warning again. Avoid falling for the trappings of previous test case October the 7th cyclical escalations between Muslims and non-Muslim traitors on every side from the world stage, but this time involving two nuclear rivals, but still kicked off by classic globalist terrorist proxies in order to provoke World War III, to derail the coming peace between nations that is currently being negotiated between all blocs and nations and is guided by God. That warning that we're stating here, that it could well be globalists, war hawks, backing these terrorist proxies, has actually happened in October the 7th, and as has happened many times, in order to derail the global peace efforts that are currently being pursued, not just in Ukraine with Russia, but in Syria, in Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. And some of the security lapses we mentioned about October the 7th, there is some evidence that they recurred in Kashmir during this attack. And you can see it here. The Times reports on the 28th of April, the army, that's the Indian army, the army said it wanted to understand the security lapse that left the tourists so vulnerable. They were attacked in a vast meadow with not a single soldier around, despite Kashmir being one of the most militarized zones in the world. The worst attack on civilians in Kashmir for 25 years. It has pushed anger to fever pitch, not least because the victims were asked whether they were Hindu before being killed. It was the deadliest attack on Indian civilians since the Mumbai atrocity in 2008, which was carried out by the Pakistan-based Islamist group Lashkar-e-Taiba, or LET. The key part here is to look at that top part in bold, the security lapse. It's one of the most militarized zones in the world, but there was not a soldier in sight when this attack happened. Again, that is exactly what happened on October 7th with the Gaza attack. It took 7 hours for the IDF to respond to Hamas's attack in perhaps the most militarized border and monitored border on the planet, and the CCTV footage of that attack has gone missing. You know, the Israeli military's own CCTV footage from its border has gone missing. Hamas didn't take it. They didn't get to the border crossing and take it. We're talking of hard drives. We're talking of information that is backed up on servers. It's gone missing. Where is it? Again, more on that in a moment. But the security lapse in Kashmir does serve as a warning that there may well be something behind this. It's why we're saying that despite the fact it is true that Pakistan has a history of doing this, more evidence is required as to exactly who precisely was behind this specific attack. It must come down to the evidence. And talking of evidence, we've mentioned October the 7th a lot. This is why it's so important that it must come down to the evidence. Look at that. Jerusalem Post reports the 24th of March 2025, headlined, Netanyahu's funding for Hamas via Qatar enabled October the 7th invasion, Shin Bet reveals. Shin Bet is Israel's internal security organization. Israel's own intelligence agency, Shin Bet, has said that Netanyahu was behind the facilitation of the October the 7th attack. You read that correctly. And it's why we are warning and advising caution when it comes to this Kashmir attack, because this happens on the world stage. False flags happen, and it's very important to get the evidence to understand exactly what's happened. We're going to read from that Jerusalem Post article to get to some of the detail here for you. Dated 24th of March 2025, Jerusalem Post reports, while the Shin Bet Israeli security agency took a significant amount of responsibility for the disasters on October the 7th, in its report published unexpectedly on Tuesday, it also implicated Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by implying that his policies regarding the Temple Mount, the treatment of Palestinian prisoners, and the judicial reform led to Hamas's decision to initiate its long-planned invasion. Here's the key part in bold. Other policies carried out under Netanyahu that the agency flagged as problematic and as contributions to Hamas' decision to invade were his, meaning Netanyahu's, were his facilitation of Qatari funding to Hamas and his opposition to proposed assassination operations of top Hamas leaders at the time. Oh dear. Israel's own intelligence agency is blaming Israel's prime minister for facilitating the funding of Hamas and opposing the assassination of its main leadership that eventually carried out the October the 7th attack. Yahya Sinwar was the mastermind behind that. Israel's intelligence agency is accusing Netanyahu of opposing his assassination right up until the attack. Of course, he was released from an Israeli prison in a prisoner exchange. It's all looking very suspicious. The date of that news is the 24th of March. Today's Times reports a very interesting development on that story, and it is this. Israeli spy chief to step down after rift with Netanyahu. You can see the date there, 28th of April. That's from the Times. Ronan Bar and the Prime Minister are facing each other in court as they trade accusations of lying and blame for the October the 7th attacks. So he's basically stood down. Such has grown his rift with Netanyahu that it can no longer sustain. He can no longer sustain being the head of the Shin Bet. These two men are locked in a war with each other over what happened on October the 7th. The Times reports 28th of April. Israel's spy chief has announced his resignation over the failure of the security establishment to prevent the October the 7th massacre by Hamas. Ronan Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence service, said he would step down on June the 15th, nearly 3 months after Benjamin Netanyahu tried to dismiss him, saying he no longer trusted him. The sacking was blocked by the Supreme Court after a petition by opposition parties who said it constituted a conflict of interest motivated by the agency's investigations into a corruption scandal involving Netanyahu's closest aides. So all of this demonstrates that certainly on Israel's, in the case of Israel with October the 7th, its own domestic intelligence services, the Shin Bet, have blamed Netanyahu for facilitating the Hamas attack, not least by funding, but also by direct material support for the mastermind Yahya Sinwar, by Netanyahu's refusal to allow for his assassination so that he could rise to the top. It all looks a bit like a false flag operation that provided Netanyahu with a pretext to go into Gaza. All of this will republish in terms of receipts in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, but you can see there at the bottom of this image, we'd already published all of this for you in the Radical Dispatch as far back as the 15th of October 2023, only a few days after the October the 7th attacks. That same few weeks after the attacks, we published, next week in fact, after the attacks, we published that headline that's at the bottom of the screen for you. Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas for war. Receipts. You can see it being compared with the later 2025 headline from March by the Jerusalem Post above it. It's almost identical. The Jerusalem Post says Netanyahu's funding for Hamas via Qatar enabled October the 7th invasion, Shin Bet reveals. And ours from 2 years prior in the Radical Dispatch, Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas for war. The shadow knows. It's all there for you. We're going to republish those receipts for you again tomorrow. The reason we're showing you all of this is to go back to the warning we issued and then link it back to Kashmir for everybody so that we can circle back. The warning is this: avoid falling for the trappings of previous test case October the 7th, cyclical escalations between Muslim and non-Muslim traitors on every side from the world stage, but this time involving two nuclear rivals, but still kicked off by classic globalist terrorist proxies in order to provoke World War III to derail the coming peace between nations that is currently being negotiated between all blocs of nations and is guided by God. What peace are we referring to? Well, we are referring to the peace that has already happened with the withdrawal of American occupying forces in Afghanistan, leading to, of course, a less than desirable Taliban takeover of the country, but nevertheless an end to the war, to the resolution of the situation in Syria, leading to Jolani, formerly of Al-Qaeda, and therefore less than desirable, coming to power, becoming Prime Minister Ahmed al-Shara, but still preferable because it ends the war in Syria, and the negotiations that Trump is leading with Russia over Ukraine. Those three are examples of where peace is coming, and Trump negotiating with Iran. As we mentioned 2 weeks ago in the Radical Dispatch, headlined, Trump kickstarts Iran-US talks, grand regional settlement for peace is coming. If you wanted to derail all of that, then you would seek to spark conflicts in the world's hotspots instead. We still take the view that a grand regional settlement for peace is coming. This attack in Kashmir will not scupper the grand regional settlement for peace. Of course, if it did escalate, as we've said, it would involve China against India. And of course, that would embroil Russia and America. That would scupper President Trump's peace efforts. We still think that the direction of travel is towards peace. The conflict in Afghanistan has been withdrawn from. The conflict in Syria has been withdrawn from. So the CIA-backed insurrection in Afghanistan has ended. The CIA and Mossad-backed jihadist insurrection in Syria will draw to a close. And now the CIA-backed war and Zelensky's war in Ukraine will come to a close as Trump negotiates peace with Putin. And the Iran-backed war in Yemen against the Saudi-backed militia, so the Houthis, who are Iran-backed, against the Yemeni government that is Saudi-backed, that conflict will come to an end because Trump is negotiating peace with Iran as well, despite what Netanyahu wants, which is war with Iran. So what we are noticing is that some voices, globalists, and Netanyahu, keep in mind, is a globalist. This is not a Jewish thing. It's not even, by the way, an Israeli thing, because Shin Bet, as you can see, their internal or domestic intelligence agency, oppose Netanyahu in this. It's not even an Israeli, it's a globalist thing. Do not listen to anybody seeking to make this a sectarian or hate-filled or discriminatory framework with which to analyze these events. They, in doing so, are adding fuel to the very fires of sectarianism that the war hawks are seeking to provoke by doing these attacks. It isn't a Jewish thing. It isn't an Israeli thing. It isn't a Muslim thing. It isn't a Hindu thing. This is a globalist war hawk thing versus those who seek to prevent war. And President Trump happens to be on the anti-war side of this equation. The Shin Bet inside Israel, their domestic intelligence services, happen to be on the anti-war side of this. Netanyahu happens to be on the pro-war side of this, as you can see by his actions in Gaza and his desire to go to war against Iran. Inside Pakistan, you can see that the Pakistani military happens to be on the globalist side of this, which is why they ousted the former Prime Minister Imran Khan and threw him into prison for refusing to support Ukraine, Zelensky's war in Ukraine. Likewise, inside India, you can see Modi using Netanyahu-style, Likud-style house demolition and other similar sorts of rhetoric that is places him firmly in the bellicose side of this equation. So the position that should be taken is with the anti-war elements in all of these countries, regardless of which side of the political spectrum, left or right, that puts you in each of these countries. Only the anti-war stance makes sense, because what we're really dealing with is a globalist effort for a global palace coup, as we noted through the COVID era, and where that failed, to spark World War III in order to scupper the President Trump-led efforts to lead to a grand regional settlement and a prolonged period of peace for the planet. All of that is explained for you in the Radical Dispatch from 2 weeks ago, which is again on your screens. Here, Trump kickstarts Iran-US talks. Grand regional settlement for peace is coming. But we will republish all of this for you tomorrow in the Radical Dispatch as well. And we'll conclude on this note. When we say we don't think war is coming, we do speak from a position of, for want of a better phrase, we've been there. And we speak from a position of authority on this. And I'm reassuring everybody, we do not think this will lead to World War III. This is a picture of me and my father. My father, as we've already mentioned, served in the 1965 war in the Pakistan Navy on the Pakistan warship known as the Badr, a destroyer warship. The interesting thing to note is the quote there that explains how that 1965 war began. The conflict began following Pakistan's unsuccessful Operation Gibraltar, which was designed to infiltrate forces into Jammu and Kashmir to participate in an insurgency against Indian rule. That's how the 1965 war began. Most of those who participated in that war of my father's generation would now be on the Imran Khan anti-war side of this equation. Rest assured, the people of Pakistan have awoken to globalist warmongering machinations and oppose their own army leadership on that front. The solution would be, as we've said in the warning that we stated, would be very clearly to release Imran Khan from prison. And that would be the solution so that we avoid those who are seeking to to provoke World War III. Release Imran Khan from prison, allow him to take responsibility for peace negotiations between India and Pakistan that lead to a permanent peace between these two countries that have not witnessed peace since their formation, which was since partition in 1947. They have been at war with each other ever since then, exactly like Israel, because it was also created in that same period, 1948. The conflicts of that era left by the British Empire's divide and rule policies, where they deliberately left borders unresolved, such as the line of control in Kashmir and such as the West Bank and Gaza for Israel. The retreating Brits deliberately left borders unresolved because those colonialists knew that by allowing for conflict in those areas with undefined borders, they could continue to divide and conquer. It's high time for the divide and conquer era to come to an end and for peace to reign. That's the effort of President Trump. Like him or loathe him, as we said in this stream, the anti-war position puts you on any given side of the left-right divide in each of these countries because it's no longer relevant. In India, it's the anti-BJP elements, otherwise known as Indian liberals, who are against war. In Pakistan, it's the Imran Khan-based populist conservatives who are against war, not the liberals, which is the PPP, nor the Nawaz Sharif-led Muslim League, which is, again, part of the uniparty system run by the very liberal army leadership. And so, depending on the country, your anti-war position will put you on any given side of this false and fake left-right divide. In America, it puts you on the side of MAGA. In Israel, it puts you on the side of their internal domestic intelligence agency, Shin Bet, against the Kudniks and Netanyahu's party. So it isn't really about left or right anymore. All of that becomes irrelevant. It's about globalists versus anti-globalists, war hawks against those who seek to oppose war so that we may enter a period of prolonged peace, which will be good for humanity. That's all we got time for this week's Warrior Creed live stream. We will, as always, publish the receipts for today's stream in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch. And we'll be back next week. And we encourage all of those who subscribe to the Radical Dispatch to become premium members, because without your support, we cannot continue this work. Please do join as paying members. It allows us to continue supporting this independent investigative analysis that we provide. Thank you. You've been listening to the Radical Majid Nawaz. Until next time, this is Warrior Creed.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warrior